So I'll be going over again some of the things we've already touched upon, but with variations again in perspectives and an added section at the end on Libra, the polar opposite of Aries, the importance of balancing the pairs of opposites through this sign, and very much needed in our conference and in the world at large today. So we see Geneva's jet d'eau, whose upright plume is a symbol of the first grey soul of Geneva and of spiritual aspiration reaching heavenward. Of course, Geneva being one of the cities of Switzerland, which we're going to also examine in this presentation. And so we, again, of course, look at the familiar picture here of the centres. London for the British Empire, New York for the Western Hemisphere, Geneva for Europe and Russia, Tokyo for the Far East, Darjeeling for India and the greater part of Asia. And just a little note at the bottom here, DK referred to the USSR, which at that time, back in the early part of the 20th century, included modern Ukraine. And I think hinting that he and the hierarchy regard them as one entity, ruled by the same rays and signs. Of course, this is open to much debate, of course. And just to mention that. And Geneva, the heart center of the 5 planetary centers of first ray soul, second ray personality. First ray, of course, concerns politics particularly. Second ray is the major ray upon this planet. Geneva ruled by Leo, which of course distributes the second ray by its rulership of the sun, and partly also the esoteric ruler Neptune, which concerns the so-called second aspect, god of the waters, Geneva's jet d'eau, whose upright plume, as we said before, is the symbol of the first ray, and of the blood that pumps powerfully through the planetary heart, bringing the life force to the body, circulating the life force, if you like, through the planet. And this second ray force is urgently needed to evoke the second ray souls of Britain and USA within that triangle, or of all nations really, but particularly Britain and USA, as they are second ray souls. And to counter the panic narrative that we are all inundated by on a daily basis through our media, to move from fear-based global politics to love, wisdom, and true Aquarian sharing, the ideal of the Aquarian age. And we strive to these ideals. We haven't realized them yet, but we certainly strive in that direction. And so I'd like to linger a moment on this other diagram, this 5-pointed star, of course, which is the symbol of Venus and the 5th ray. The 5th ray being the only ray that comes through Aquarius. And of course, which Venus, of course, is the highest soulful soul aspect to planet Earth. She's the sister planet to Earth. And I was looking at her last night in the sky, very, very bright, staggeringly, stunningly bright, and very inspiring to look at. And so Venus is a so-called sacred planet. The Earth is not yet reached that stage of perfection, at least outwardly. And so Geneva here is, as I said, first ray soul, a second ray personality, and represents or is proposed as the second ray, as the heart center of the planet. All these are proposals which I have in a couple of essays you can find on my website about the planetary centers. So far, this is my best estimation. And so at the top of the triangle, the 5-pointed star, the pentagram, we have Darjeeling, which I propose as the head center of the 5 centers. And of course, it's the head because the hierarchy are in a sense the head of humanity. They bring through the plan from Shambhala to humanity. And they are appropriately a second ray soul with a fifth ray personality, ruled by Scorpio, another arm of the fixed cross of which Geneva shares being a Leo. So the heart and the head, you can see, just as in the human being, human individual, we see this close relationship between the heart and head of Geneva and Darjeeling. Of course, Darjeeling or Dorje, the thunderbolt, Dorje, that name comes from, and therefore the first ray of will or power, which Pluto, the ruler of Scorpio, is the co-ruler of, along with Vulcan. Then we have London over here, and as a fifth ray soul, a seventh ray personality. The fifth ray for both Darjeeling and London relate to the fifth root race and the development of mind or manas, and also the fifth ray ruled by Venus again. And London is ruled by Gemini, which is also the soul of Britain. And Gemini is ruled by both Mercury and Venus, and they have Venus again. So Venus, who brings together the pairs of opposites upon the mental plane in Gemini and creates harmony and beauty. Synthesis, the successful dialogue of the twins. London is also a Libra personality, which I'm going to talk about later, and has combined with its Gemini energy, has a great potential for dialogue between nations and creating harmony out of conflict, as it has been in the past, of course. So we come to New York down here, one of the legs, if you like, of the pentagram, a second ray soul, third ray personality, of course, and this reflects its great diversity of arts and finance and so forth, of the Statue of Liberty that stands in that city, asking to bring me all your poor and your storm-tossed and all the rest of it. As we know, that famous poem that I've just completely mangled, but and ruled by Cancer, the mother that brings all those, was it storm-tossed to her shore, the immigrants, the refugees, all of humanity to this amazing one city. And Cancer, of course, ruled by Moon and Neptune and the sixth ray. And New York proposed as the Ajna center of the planet. And likewise, we move over to the other leg of the pentagram, Tokyo, that corresponds to the Far East. A fourth ray soul, a sixth ray personality. Of course, the fourth ray is the soul ray of the Eastern Hemisphere, of the Orient, as we call it, as opposed to the Occident. And ruled by Cancer, Moon and Neptune again, similar to New York, and proposed, therefore, that Tokyo is the solar plexus center. The other two centers, the sacral and the base of the spine, will not be awoken for many millions of years, we've been told, and they are somewhere in the vicinity of Australia and Africa, but that's another discussion. So again, another perspective of the five planetary inlets that we direct energy somewhat mystically toward in our meditations, because we are not fully aware yet of myself included, of course, of the complexity of these energies, of these ray and astrological energies that govern each one. Right, so we move on again to just remind ourselves of the planetary centers and a little bit more of a close-up here. To note also that all these five planetary centers are located in the northern hemisphere between the latitudes of 52 degrees and 27 degrees north. And Perhaps the reason for this is that the Earth is oriented to the North Pole star Polaris, and that's why the first three spiritual festivals in the Northern Hemisphere really have a impact upon the whole planet, including the Southern Hemisphere. And the seasons are somewhat the veil for the true quality of energy that emanates from the zodiac signs. So we have New York, London, Geneva, very close together, of course, these two. But of course, as we said before, London for the whole of the British Empire, which is an interesting idea given its proximity to Geneva. But there you go. Darjeeling over here in northern India. I'll never forget my first visit to Darjeeling in 1992 on the Darjeeling train that some of you are familiar with. And of course over here in Tokyo, to the Far East. So just a little brief recap there for the planetary centers. And to note also, most of you know that I'm pretty keen on geography or esoteric geography. In fact, it's going to be the title of my next installment of the book, The Hidden History of Humanity, or now called Unveiling Genesis, Mysteries of the Root Races and Cycles. The next one is going to be called Geography and Giants. And geography was part of the mysteries in days of old, according to Blavatsky. These secrets of land and sea were divulged to the men of the secret science, but not to the exoteric geographers. And furthermore, she says the Hindu books of science contain the most profound knowledge of astronomy and geography. Indeed, the Alps of Switzerland and Europe concern the sinking of Atlantis, the group of continents and islands of Atlantis, first in their final disappearance of the largest, was an event that was coincident with the elevation of the Alps that used to be joined to the Himalayas, and second in the sinking of the last of the fair islands mentioned by Plato, the fourth and final sinking of Atlantis, which was about 13,000 years ago. I messed up a few passages there I've got to take out, so excuse me if that sounds a bit muddled. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the beautiful, magnificent Alps of Central Europe are imbued with great spiritual power and are old landmarks from the times of Atlantis. Western Europe and Britain and so forth were all parts of Lemuria and Atlantis at one stage or another, as was the eastern portion of the United States and of South America. This is what I seek to explore more in this book called Geography and Giants, the evolving continents, they're sinking, they're raising, they're reforming in different root races. So we see Switzerland in the center of Europe, this red portion here, of which Geneva is one of the capitals, right on the border of France, of course. And Geneva's motto is I seek to fuse, to blend, and to serve, befitting very much its secondary personality. Here's Geneva down here. I went through Switzerland a few months ago, across Europe to Lithuania, actually, and back again. So drive through the mountains is absolutely stunning, as most of you know, as are the lakes around, the mountain lakes around Switzerland and Germany and Austria, of course, and northern Italy and France. Beautiful part of the world. Here we have the center of Europe: France, Germany, Austria, Italy, Switzerland. So Geneva is ruled by Leo the Lionheart, the polar opposite of Aquarius, which is the personality sign of Switzerland. And DK tells us the force which the center of Geneva is expressing is that of the second ray of love wisdom, with its major emphasis at this time on the quality of inclusiveness. It is concerned with the binding together in brotherly love and with the expression of the nature of service. This planetary centre, which conditions the little country of Switzerland, has had a most potent effect upon that country, and a study of those effects will demonstrate future possibility for the world. Interesting statement. Geneva, Switzerland has enabled two relatively antagonistic divisions of the Christian faith to work together with a minimum of friction. It has made Geneva the origin of the Red Cross, that world activity which works impartially with and for the nationals of all countries and for the prisoners of all nations. Of course, the United Nations, one of its branches, is based in Geneva. It housed that sad though well-intentioned experiment which was called the League of Nations, which of course led to the United Nations eventually. It is that which has protected that small country, neutrality, from the aggressive sweep of the Axis powers in World War II. So indeed, Geneva is the location of thousands of NGOs, non-government organizations, connected to the UN and so forth. It's also a very big banking sector, as are a few other Swiss cities. So this is the proposed planetary heart center. And there was a great purity in Switzerland that you feel when you're in the mountains, whenever you get elevated to some altitude. As we all know, of course, we get into the rarefied atmosphere of the mountain air, the purity of the vibrations there, of course. Hence, what better planetary centre, Geneva, Leo, and nation, Switzerland, Aquarius, with an historical reputation of neutrality, to bind together in brotherly love two second-ray souls, UK, USA, and two Aquarian souls, Russia and the USA. To bind together in brotherly love two second-ray souls, UK, USA, and two Aquarian souls, Russia and USA. So Aquarius, ruled by Uranus, the ruler of the seventh ray of ceremonial magical order, the ray of organization, also links to the seventh ray soul of Russia in this new seventh ray cycle that is increasing in strength, as we know. Therefore, to simmer the antagonism emanating from UK, USA, NATO warhawks, we use the very simple but potent visualization that has been in this daily meditation throughout the conference, with Geneva placed at the center. No matter what your political views are of either side of the equation, this meditation or visualization holds true. And so we see in this table that I touched upon yesterday, the various linkings and commonalities of the zodiac signs. And what I want to point out today is, as I did yesterday, Switzerland's Aquarius personality linking to USA and Russia's Aquarius soul and Moscow's Aquarius personality. So this linking of these four different entities, cities and nations, is extremely important. And Switzerland plays a very important role, more so than I had hitherto realized, in fact. And Switzerland is an Aries soul. Given that Switzerland is an Aries soul, and this is an Aries full moon period, perhaps we can invoke the soul of Switzerland during this conference for new ideas to flow forth from the soul of this nation. But Switzerland is not the only Aries soul. Neighboring Germany is also an Aries soul. And you'll notice in this table as well that out of this table refers mainly to the triangle of nations of Britain, Russia, USA. The only Libran energy there is the Libran personality of London, which I mentioned before. Libra being the polar opposite of Switzerland's Aries soul and of Germany's Aries soul. But there are other Libran nations in Europe, and that is Scandinavia. The four nations that compose Scandinavia is a Libran soul. I'll mention this in a minute. So the third day of the conference will be challenging as we've reached the impasse which we all knew would emerge, the diametrically opposed views upon Russia and Ukraine by various presenters and, as we noticed yesterday in the chat feed, participants. Here's where we must adopt Aries polarity in Libra instead of going head to head like the proverbial Aries battering ram, as we see here in the picture, going at it head to head. The cultivation of the Libran middle way, Libra the peacemaker, as a key to resolving conflict. Of course, conflict is humanity's lot. We are ruled generically by the fourth ray of harmony through conflict, also known as the ray of beauty, art, and music. So the fourth ray does have a similar themes to Libra. As a co-worker who's been following this conference said to me this morning, unification is a result of soul expression. It is not the cause. This needs to be kept in mind. The cause is always at the causal level, and one reaches the soul only after building the middle way, the way out of the maze. The middle way is the subtle soul itself, and the middle way is Libra. Libra governs the narrow razor-edge path that runs between the pairs of opposites and, if safely trodden, requires the development of a sense of values and the power to utilize rightly the balancing analytical faculty of the mind. Libra governs the balancing of the pairs of opposites upon the mental plane, and the Tibetan says can be achieved through the use of the judicial mind, that word judicial as in justice, the law, that the scales cease to swing from one side to the other, and where equilibrium is achieved and the middle way is seen. Of course, we have this great poster here of the man on the tightrope balancing head and heart, a great symbol of Libra. The way of the head, the way of the heart. Yet many of us think that the way of the heart is the emotions, and it's not the emotions. The emotion is certainly a doorway to the heart. So let's bear this in mind as we navigate our way through these challenging times as servers of the plan and in anticipation of the Aries full moon period that we have now well and truly entered, just a few days before the Aries full moon. The energies of Aries will become far more emphasized, expanded, even exaggerated. And it is very much the notion of invoking Libra to keep the peace, so to speak, to keep that balance, to keep that harmony, and navigate between these difficult pairs of opposites that we face. So again, with this diagram that I had before, and so we can invoke the Aries soul of Switzerland and its polar opposite Libra, drawing upon Geneva's motto, I seek to fuse, to blend and serve, befitting its second-rate personality. And Switzerland's neutrality is perfectly expressed by its Aries polar opposite Libra, as I said before. In the table above, the only other Libran expression in this triangle is the Libran personality of London here. And but Scandinavia is a Libran soul and the seat of the Nobel Peace Prize. Austria is the only other European nation with a Libran soul and adjoins Switzerland along with Aries soul Germany. So we have an interesting cluster of nations in Central Europe that carry this Aries Libra polarity. Germany, Aries soul, Austria, Libra soul, Switzerland, Aries soul, and so forth. There's probably some connections with France and Italy too, that we could easily make, I think, via the rays. And of course, via that map that I showed in my last presentation with the Leo personality and Leo souls of nations and cities around Europe. But we're talking here mainly about Aries Libra. And so there are so many different relationships that can be opened up and explored in this respect. So Scandinavia, another Libran soul, the source of the Nobel Peace Prize. I think it's a very interesting factor that can be invoked. But again, we bear in mind with all these nations that they have personalities, imperfect and unintegrated like our own, and also the possibility of distorting soul force, as I mentioned the other day with regard to Britain and its Gemini soul. So we ask the rhetorical question, can we invoke the souls of these nations to bring balance to the warring forces in Europe? And we have here some maps that I had in a presentation a couple of years ago relating, just as an aside, relating to Darjeeling down here at the bottom and its triangle that it creates with Kathmandu, Shigatse, which is the area where several of the masters are located. Not in an apartment on the main street, of course, somewhere hidden up in the mountains. And of course, Mount Everest, the highest mountain on this planet, is in this area, as is Kanchenjunga, that can be seen from Darjeeling. A really potent area of the planet, extraordinarily high mountains, mountaineers, the Tibetans, the Nepalese, the Indians, and its connection to Shambhala. Shambhala is located in the Gobi Desert, approximately in this particular area, actually, because Blavatsky does give the rough coordinates of Shambhala in the Secret Doctrine. But just to note this, when we try and use the imagination, when I mentioned the direct link that Geneva has to Darjeeling, and this is what Darjeeling is connected to. The will of God, Sanakamara, and Shambhala is transmitted quite close geographically through Darjeeling and this general area of where the masters inhabit. We're told that the Christ himself does not inhabit this area, but Asia Minor, which I think is up towards some of the countries of Kyrgyzstan and places like that. You can just see it here on the edge here. There's also various sacred mountains around here, which Nicholas Roerich talks about in his travel books. Anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. And so I open this up now to some questions, comments thus far, clarifications? We have plenty of time to explore that. I think, let me see, where are we now? So please do share if you have something to say. Where to start? People might be asking themselves. Anywhere would be the answer, I'd say. Question that you might have that you might be hesitant to ask, maybe the question on someone else's lips. So I urge you to ask away. Andrew says, as you mentioned the geographic significance, I wonder about the original geography of Pangaea. Someone, could you mute your microphone, please? We're getting some sound coming through. Yeah, well, the idea of Pangaea and all the continents being joined together and then drifting apart, is that what you mean, Andrea? This, if so, this theory, yes, she says, this theory has been discounted totally by the Blavatsky secret doctrine and many different passages in there, transmitted by some of the masters to Blavatsky, Kutumi in particular, as I recall. Even though we can kind of look at this theory of continental drift and the continents fitting neatly into each other like a jigsaw puzzle, it isn't that simple. And a great theosophical thinker, writer called David Pratt, you can go to his website, davidpratt.com, I think it is, something like that, has some brilliant essays that completely discount that theory. And I certainly concur with his views, which are in resonance with the secret doctrine. This Christina Kosmodakis says all 5 planetary centers are located at the Northern Hemisphere. Any further thoughts? Well, the only thoughts I had were expressed in terms of the North Pole star, that the Earth is oriented toward Polaris, and the 2 pointer stars, a very esoteric triangle that we're all probably aware of. And of course, one of the pointers, the Merak, is conjunct the Leo moon of this conference horoscope. Gisele says, was it mentioned that Shambhala is in the Gobi Desert, or is that something else that is there? No, Shambhala, we are told by the Tibetan and Blavatsky, has a geographical location in the Gobi Desert, which is just a couple of hours flight from Beijing, actually, which is interesting, given the fact that Beijing or China is a first-ray Seoul and Shambhala is a first-ray center. Of course, it's an etheric substance, and it can be clairvoyantly seen and visited, as many people have noted. Okay, so getting the questions thick and fast now.
Philip, Kathy Newburn has a hand up for a while now.
Just a moment, I'll just deal with the. Okay, Sabine just said, it's David Pratt, Pratt, Sabine. And go ahead, Kathy, thank you. We're not hearing you yet, Kathy. While we're waiting for Kathy to come in, Frida Kemp says, hi Philip, I'd like to add linkages with Canada. Second ray soul was Britain and USA. Seventh ray personality was Russia. Plus Taurus soul, Britain and Libra personality was Switzerland. Indeed, Frida, we can make these connections all over the world, and they're most significant and most important to follow through and study. I believe, is that you that we can hear now, Kathy?
Hi, yeah. Sorry, I'm on the streets of New York, so it might be a little noisy, but I just wanted to get your view. I mean, I know so much of what all the groups are doing now is preparing for the 2025 conclave. And I wondered if you could just share a few thoughts with the group on what's happening and how it relates to that august moment in planetary history.
What relates to 2025, the current situation in the world, you mean?
Yeah, and how you see things unfolding as we move forward towards that point and after.
Yeah. Well, as I've said many times in my newsletters, I believe that there's somewhat an assault on humanity by the materialistic forces that know and understand what 2025 means, the setting of the date for the externalization of the hierarchy in the next few decades or even sooner. And this is why we are embroiled in such a potent war upon the mental plane. The battle for hearts and minds, as Alexander said, the glamours that have been thrust upon and surrounding humanity in terms of distortion of thought, distortion of history itself, revisionist everything, and distortion and distractions. And so it's the task of the new group of world servers to really try and keep humanity on track subjectively by re-enunciating the timeless principles of human living, of the ageless wisdom. So the battle is far from finished. It may go for another several years or decades. In terms of reaching a final resolution, well, it could be a century. We don't know, but we do know that the hierarchy are watching, weighing, testing humanity, sifting humanity, if you like, and all disciples and aspirants on the path in a process of initiation, testings for initiation, in fact, of making the right choices. And this has been an intense process for the last 3 years, as we all know. So that's a short answer to that, Kathy. I'll move on to the next couple of posts here in the chat. Alexander says ancient Asia Minor is a geographic region located in the southwestern part of Asia, comprising most of present-day Turkey. Then I must have meant Asia Major. Then with all the Stan countries, the guy who visited all those areas and called them Stan something or something Stan, Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, and so forth. And which is the source of many sacred rivers, the Ganges being one of them, that Blavatsky talks about as well. Antonio Nobilio, one of our presenters, says, in this fifth race, the Mano's fifth mind principle needs to be developed, and the physical side of the mind is the grey cortical brain in the northern part of the brain. Just a moment, I'm just scrolling through here. Then the next two inlets or left spirillas or spirali of the human kingdom will be activated in the limbic southern part of the earth. Yeah, very interesting symbolism there. Or the skull, she says, referring to the cortical brain. Did you mean there? You can talk on your microphone if you want to clarify that, Antonella.
Yes, yes. If we see our globe as a skull, we can see that the majority of the emerged lands are now in the northern part. It wasn't in the past. It will be in the future. We don't know. So it's like in the skull, the gray cortical brain, where the reasoning part of the manas has its physical site, is in the northern part of the skull. So also the current incarnated monads, human monads, are mostly in this part. And so the current 5 inlets activated with these 5 cities are in this northern part. Yes, and as you said, also because Great Bear, not only the Polaris is on the northern part of our current firmament. So it's really like, it seems that we are guided by this inner and outer sky, which is guiding us to develop and fix the manas to be ready to express buddhi, love, wisdom. So in the future, it won't be the 2 other inlets in Australia and Africa will be activated. And so the 7 spirillas that Decay mentions as the 7 vibrational parts of the atoms of our constitution will be all activated, as it is already for the humanity of the planetary scheme of Venus, for example. So,
absolutely. Great, great comparison there. Thank you.
thank you.
The pole, is the skull cap. It's the location of the original Polarian first root race, and then it grew a neck down from the pole for the second root race, the Hyperborean, which actually inhabited much of those regions south of the pole and right across, in many ways, the northern part of Russia. And then, of course, Lemuria emerged from that further down, and then Atlantis. That's a story that Blavatsky traces throughout the Secret Doctrine. We've got a few minutes left. Any more comments, questions, clarifications? Again, I realize it's a very dense subject, but it's also very inspiring when we get to understand these energies that we can link up and connect with. In the chat here, we have Eric saying Egyptian pyramids are not mentioned as power centers. Any thoughts? Absolutely, they are power centers, of course, and some brilliant research in the last decade by various authors looking at the pyramids as gigantic batteries, absorbing or receiving energy and transmitting energy, both electrically and spiritually, from the high and lower kind of frequencies of electricity. That's the short answer to that one. Magda says, work hypothesis. Middle European countries, Switzerland and Austria, plus Italy and France, are involved in upcoming externalization of hierarchy through Geneva Center via Master R. Then he mentions, or Master R. Steiner, as in Rudolf Steiner. Christ plus R.K. Rakotsi, I think you mean there. Could you please expand on anthroposophy's role? Well, Rudolf Steiner was certainly a disciple who brought some great teachings, and whose anthroposophy still survives today, particularly in Germany, of course, and around the world, and particularly in education. He and Blavatsky knew each other, and he fell out with Blavatsky and went on his own path. I have read, when I started reading all the esoteric literature, I waded through most of Steiner's books, which is not an easy feat because of the translation from German is not that great. But I found Steiner wanting with regard to the some distortions of Blavatsky's work. But nonetheless, he was a seer, clairvoyant, psychic, and a disciple, no doubt. So that's my short answer to that comment. Thanks.